so much suffering.
Many Americans are saying that you should have warned them the virus was spreading. Why did you wait so long to warn them?
Who you with?
This may be a lot of things, but it is definitely not about Black lives. And remember that when they come for you.
Thousands of Americans have gathered to express their outrage.
Are you tired?
Supporters of Donald Trump held a rally in Washington a week after the presidential race was called for Democrat Joe Biden.
But are you willing to condemn white supremacists and militia groups?
But
do it. Well,
I would say almost everything I see is from the left wing. Who would you like me to condemn?
White supremacists and right
Proud
militia.
Boys, stand back and stand by.
This is the America we live in. 14.8 million COVID cases, 282,000 dead. Nurses, healthcare professionals, and essential workers everywhere are at their wits' end.
More than 1.5 million people across the world have now died from coronavirus. Nearly a fifth of them are in the United States.
While healthcare professionals everywhere try to implore the public to take safety precautions and wear COVID-regulated masks,
wearing a mask is an act of kindness.
Some members of the American far right have determined that the regulation of mask wearing is oppressive.
Every single one of you have a smirk behind that little mask, but every single one of you are going to get punished by God. You cannot escape God.
Meanwhile, the president's rhetoric surrounding the virus has been divisive, to say the least.
COVID-19, that name gets further and further away from China as opposed to calling it the Chinese virus.
Racial violence is on the rise. The US is entering its 10th month of protests. These protests have sparked much debate and conflict. They began in March of this year when George Floyd was murdered by a member of the Minnesota Police Department.
A growing group of protesters have gathered at the front of the Minneapolis 3rd Precinct. We'll give you a shot from Sky 4. You can see the front of this building is on fire.
Currently, the country stands divided as protesters take a stand against police brutality and police officers and local officials retaliate against protesters.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. The truck was going incredibly. Well, oh my gosh. People got out of the way. That's a good thing. If he was honking his horn, maybe, I don't know how that happens. I honestly don't know.
With hundreds of thousands dead.
So the numbers that you've been hearing, the 180,000 plus deaths, are real deaths from COVID-19. Let not be any confusion.
Unemployed.
An unpleasant surprise in the unemployment numbers out today. Jobless claims went back up. 870,000 Americans filing for first-time unemployment benefits last week. That's about 10,000 more people than the week before. And it's a sign that the improvement we've been seeing on the jobs market is not only slowing down, but it actually might be sliding backwards.
Homeless.
You can't mistake the growing gulf between the rich and poor here. Homeless camps piling up on affluent LA sidewalks. COVID has been the catalyst, but it's laid bare deep-rooted problems.
Mourning and grieving for the loss of their loved ones.
Early Sunday morning, the 22nd, we got a call from the hospital. My father was not breathing well. The hard decision of talking to my mom, knowing that this was not going to improve. It was time to say goodbye. And my mom was there all by herself. meaning, the family really wasn't there. Nobody was there to hold her hand. She shared with us the priest praying over Dad.
That just as Jesus had to enter into death to experience new life.
Then we were all there with my mom via technology, witnessing his last breath. My father's name is Don Grzybowski. Loved and adored.
What can we do to stop this? How do we fight for peace? Start by learning to communicate non-violently. The very basis of non-violent communication begins and ends with an understanding of one's wants and needs, and to learn a respect for another.
I was in a refugee camp in the Palestinian Authority, and all the crowd had to do was hear from my interpreter that I was an American. A gentleman jumps up and screams at me, "Murderer!" and another one jumps up, "Assassin!" and another one calls child killer. Within an hour, the guy that called me a murderer invites me to a Ramadan dinner at his house. I didn't hear what he thought of me. I connected to what he was feeling, what he was needing.
Marshall was able to lean into that conversation. He's being faced with a lot of anger, which often means that people might shut down and want to get out of the situation. But instead, he was able to get curious about what's going on underneath this. What questions can I ask? The next time you find yourself getting tense and finding yourself in a conflict, I invite you to think about what needs and feelings might be most alive for you.
Secondly, it is imperative that we seek knowledge on all conflicts. Education in human conflict and human rights is essential, vital even, to understanding and developing a method for conflict resolution, prevention, and ultimately, peace.
I remember visiting a primary school classroom in Tanzania. There were over 100 children in a single classroom with a single teacher. Hardly any of them had shoes, and multiple students were huddled around each textbook, memorizing content that might increase their chances of scoring well on a national examination, and that might allow them to continue on past primary education. I began to wonder then, though education has been declared a right all around the world and scores of children have entered primary school in the past couple decades, what kind of education could create the critical thinking, the active citizenship, and the respect for pluralism that might foster true human and social development beyond projections of economic returns? This question led me to explore more fully the second part of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that affirms that education shall be directed to the full development of the human personality and to the strengthening of respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms. The initiatives that seek to develop these values are called by many names: social justice education, peace education, and more literally, human rights education. These efforts are taking place across the globe and seek to align the content, the pedagogy, and the structures of education with peace and human rights principles. Education either functions as an instrument to bring about conformity, or it becomes the practice of freedom, the means by which men and women discover how to participate in the transformation of their world. Peace and human rights education is an opportunity for learners to critically analyze the conditions that surround them, pursue participatory dialogue, and ultimately engage in the practice of freedom in and with the world around them.
Finally, understanding other perspectives is absolutely vital to peace initiatives.
And I think this is so applicable in our situation as a generation, because that selfie I took when I first walked out here, why did I do that? Just because I want to document later on my channels that I matter, look at me, so cool, and I'm in a blazer, and look at all these people at a TEDx talk, and I'm just trying to establish myself, right? And this isn't an attack on selfies. I take selfies, you take selfies, we all take selfies, we love selfies. But it is a metaphor at something that's a part of our culture. We're all trying to establish a narrative. We're all trying to establish and make a difference and create a mark, and this is a good thing. But if it's not taken care of and it's not fostered well, it can easily become like my superhero complex, where I twist the narrative to be about me. And I twist it to be so dark that I end up being dark and depressed and depleted and paralyzed and not actually able to make the difference that I set out to do. We control the perspective. It's actually not our circumstances that have the power to control us or to affect us. Our circumstances really have no actual power to define anything about us or to shape us. It's how we choose to respond, it's how we choose to act, and it's how we choose to interpret what happens to us that is what shapes us. Choosing the positive perspective is not always easy. The sooner that we can actually acknowledge that yes, life is hard, the sooner we can actually start to lean into what we can do about it. Choosing hope, gratefulness, joy is free, and it is available to every human in the human race. But it is up to me to choose that posture. And so I ask you, what would it do if we shifted our narrative? What could we do as a collective unit in this room? What impact could we make if we all chose this power of perspective to choose positivity? As Margaret Mead has so famously said, never doubt what a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can do to change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has.
Knowledge has the power to end violence. Ignorance is the ultimate form of violence. Ignorance kills. This message was sponsored by the Valencia Association of Conflict Prevention and Peace.